Solaris Resources is up eightfold from a year ago. The company is advancing a copper project in Ecuador with lineage to the world's greatest mine finder. And the company recently announced a significant discovery. The CEO is Daniel Earle. Daniel, welcome back to Kitco.
Thanks so much for having me again. Pleased to be here.
I want to get to discovery in a moment, but I think it's a really good time to catch people up with Solaris first. Can you describe the company?
Yeah, Solaris is a copper growth and discovery story. And so it's got a portfolio of copper assets in the Americas. Our objective with this company is to sequentially surface the value within this portfolio and sell these assets on as we get deeper into this copper cycle.
Can you describe the projects that you have? I notice there's a collection across the Americas.
Yeah, well, the flagship asset is called Warintza, and this is a cluster of porphyry deposits in southeastern Ecuador. And so there's a small historical resource at Warintza Central based on drilling that was done 20 years ago, just in the very center of that Central deposit down to a very shallow depth. And what we've done is come in and greatly expand on that. We've been drilling off a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer panel of that deposit. And or at least we intended to, and we've actually gone beyond those dimensions in some of the more recent drilling. And then in addition to that, we've been testing the potential of the rest of the targets within this cluster of porphyries. And that's resulted in discoveries at what we call Warintza West in February, and then just the other day at Warintza East, still with a number of other targets to test within this bountiful property package.
Let's catch up on the project. But firstly, I mentioned at the top, who's Dave Lowell and what is his connection with Solaris?
Oh, well, David's one of the greatest explorers of all time. So this is the gentleman who was responsible for co-defining the porphyry copper deposit model in the first place. This is the deposit model, which now accounts for something like 60% of the world's copper resources. So incredibly important. And he took that model and then went out and applied it in the field to make more discoveries of greater consequence than anyone in history, including the largest copper deposit of all time, Escondida, now the world's largest copper mine, more than twice the size of the next largest mine. And so David, as part of this long career of innovation and discovery, he discovered our flagship project, Warintza, in Ecuador in the year 2000, and went on to make a series of other discoveries beyond that, including the Mirador mine to the south of us, which is another copper mine in Ecuador. In fact, the largest mine now in Ecuador, in the early part of the opening of this and development of this emerging sector in Ecuador.
What did you find in Warintza East?
So we've drilled a single hole at Warintza East, and this was approximately a 1,300 meter step out from the easternmost drilling at Warintza Central. And just to go back and touch on a point that I made earlier, we originally set out to drill off only 1 kilometer of strike length of Warintza Central, down to about 1 kilometer depth. In broad strokes, that would be representative of a 1 billion ton resource at Central. And in our most recent drilling, in the set of results that we put out in May and then followed up on in July, we've extended beyond that to 1,100 meters and then 1,250 meters. And that growth is to the east of Central. So east is expanding, or Central rather is expanding to the east towards Warintza East, where we stepped out a further 1,300 meters from Central and drilled so far just this single hole. Now this hole, and we've only released the upper 320 meters, which we have assays for. This is a 1,200 meter hole, but the upper 320 meters already have resulted in a major discovery at Warintza East. And so it's very exciting for us. Obviously, any new discovery represents a step change in the potential of the overall project, the resource endowment of the project. But this discovery in particular is important because of where it's located. So it's immediately adjacent to this emerging resource that we have at Central. And therefore, it's very convenient from a mine planning perspective in converting what would otherwise be mined as waste into potentially resources if we have any joy in expanding this zone. So it's kind of a double benefit, if you will, of converting waste to resources and then adding to the resource inventory as well.
So I assume you have a good problem right now. So you have the ongoing exploration program that you have, but now that you have this Warintza East, this one hole that you've drilled, what's going to be the plans over the next 12 months for exploration at Warintza?
Well, yeah, it is a good problem to have. So the situation on this project, both in all of our drilling and then the historical drilling that David Lowell undertook 20 years ago, there is not a single drill hole that has failed to intersect economic copper mineralization anywhere on this property. And so this two step outs that we've made to test new targets outside of Central, a single drill hole at Warintza West resulted in a discovery in February, and now at Warintza East, a new discovery at the location. So it's a very prospective property. The challenge is to ramp up the drilling as aggressively as we can, and to surface the value through growth and discovery that's there to be had. And so that's really what the challenge is. It's an operational challenge of delivering this project as quickly as we can.
You said in another interview that opportunities like Solaris are rare.
They are absolutely rare. This is what you would have been looking for in terms of a project description. So, a billion ton or plus billion ton type development opportunity in an open pit with high overall grades, and most importantly, and this is something that I try and emphasize for investors. Most importantly, the highest grades at surface. Okay, you need the highest grades at surface to kickstart one of these developments so that you get rapid capital payback. It drives high internal rates of return, high net asset values, and so on. This is what you would have been looking at, 20 years ago as an attractive opportunity, or in prior periods prior to that, in the copper price environment that existed then, with the available opportunities that existed then. In this current cycle, where we've depleted the inventory of projects that fit this description, with an open pit adjacent to infrastructure, high grades throughout, high grade starter pit, and so on. This is just completely unique. Okay, so now if you look at the set of development projects that are available globally for the copper industry, it's lower grade projects, it's smaller projects, it's projects that are more remote or at higher elevation or more metallurgically complex, or indeed underground projects. Rather than projects like this. So it's incredible. It's totally unique in that sense.
Now, there's lots of ESG demands in the metal space, and there's a lot of miners that are rushing to meet it. I think of Quebec's Nouveau Monde building an all-electric mine off of Quebec's hydrogrid. I think of Foran Copper, who is doing the same in Saskatchewan. Now, you have a background in investing and then in finance, Daniel. What are the shifting demands in the ESG space, and what can be accommodated if you're building something out in Ecuador?
Well, yeah, there's a reorientation of investment flows to projects that meet these ESG criteria that investors have, and increasingly will demand out into the future. So. And so copper would be a natural. I think it fits naturally with those kinds of objectives, because this is the metal which is foundational to this drive towards decarbonization. It's essential to the electrification of transport, as you see with all these electric vehicles. To the electrification of industry, to the electrification, of power grids with renewable power as opposed to, fossil fuel derived power, and entire economies and related technologies. Copper is what's wiring it all together. So I think copper is a natural place for ESG driven investment flows to go. And it's important for the copper industry to to not only deliver, but to deliver in a way that meshes with those goals around environmental stewardship and social stewardship. And so there are a number of technological solutions that the industry can look at, and indeed is looking at, from the electrification of materials haulage, the electrification of transport, moving away from diesel in these areas, and a whole host of other technologies. In this case, with this project, we're fortunate in that we're located adjacent to a power grid in Ecuador, which is supplied by something like 2/3 renewable hydroelectric power. So this is inherently going to be a low emissions project by virtue of that. In fact, this is one of the main areas of growth that the new president, Lasso in Ecuador, is targeting for natural resource development in the country, alongside the mining industry, the growth of the hydroelectric potential in the country, where the country is already a regional powerhouse and exporting power from these hydroelectric projects to neighboring countries.
Copper's had quite the run this year. What's the outlook going forward?
Yeah, copper's had quite the run when you look at it in isolation, but this is very normal for a copper price cycle. So if you look at the prior two cycles in the post GFC period, or kind of the mid 2000s copper price cycle, copper doubling over the first 12 months or so of the cycle is very normal. That would be kind of the first leg of the price cycle, if you will. But if you look at those prior comparables, you see that, in fact, the copper price, after a correction, went on to double again. So you've got a quadrupling of copper prices in each of those prior cycles over a 3-year period. So even just from a normal, cyclical standpoint, you'd be expecting significant further gains ahead for copper. But what's really different about this cycle is that by the middle of the decade, we're going to be is shifting towards more of what I talk about as being a structural bull market, where this emerging area of demand growth in kind of these green technologies, really, which is growing exponentially, but off a small base in the present, really starts to get to a size where it's meaningful and starts to dominate the supply-demand balance for the copper industry. So 1 million tons per annum currently for green demand turns into 2.5 million tons per annum by the middle of this decade, and 8 million tons per annum by the end of the decade. And that's when you're talking about really, really serious supply deficits opening up and much higher prices ahead.
Daniel Earle, thank you for speaking with Kitco.
Thanks again for having me. Yeah, really appreciate it.
He's Daniel Earle, CEO of Solaris Resources. My name is Michael McRae, and you are watching Kitco Mining.